as you're seeing, using Emulsion 4 is really simple because it's putting everything in place and then you just mix it the way you want. So whether you're a Photoshop newbie and you barely want to mess with stuff and you run the action and then use it as is, or whether you're a little nerdy like me and you want to play with those layers, it puts you in control and you can quickly switch between whatever emulsion and chemical process you want or mix them up to get something completely distinct and unique. But let's look at cyanotype. This process goes all the way back to when John Herschel discovered the cyanotype in the 1840s, I believe it was. So this is a process that you've seen a lot of variables of. Sometimes you might see a cyanotype print that's vivid and has subtle blues, and other times it might be almost no detail in the shadows and be super lo-fi. In fact, you don't even have to use a photograph to make cyanotype. Blueprints use the similar process. You may have seen plants that are done in that blue tone with a cyanotype, but we're focusing on trying to get a great cyanotype photo. And what we've done in the Emulsion 3 version of cyanotype is try to make the options as versatile as possible so you can decide what kind of cyanotype you're going for. Let's go to this right here. Here's a photo that I'm actually pretty excited about. It looks a little flat here, but we had kind of this storm coming in, these blue agave plants on the horizon. And that's what really caught my eye as I was driving by this. This is a color image still. I've not converted it to black and white, and it's still pretty plain. I'm actually going to do this a little bit differently just to mix it up. I'm going to do blackroom on this, and I'm going to run the blackroom tool first and convert this to black and white. You don't have to, and I want to be clear on that. You don't need to have blackroom to do what I'm going to show you in Emulsion 4. But by converting to blackroom first, I'm going to get two base approaches. So rather than just converting directly, I'm going to use the tools in blackroom and say, okay, here's a black and white, and I'm going to use one of the quick foundry mixes like the Ansel Light from blackroom, which basically takes a whole bunch of mod actions that are in the blackroom and adds them in here. That's something for our blackroom videos, but the bottom line is we get a great black and white conversion that has some nice contrasty richness, okay? So that's all here. That's our blackroom mix. Now let's go that we have a black and white. Let's go straight to the base action, which is the platinum base. And we're going to run that. And you're going to see that that intelligently puts itself on top of blackroom, nice and tidy. And there is our tint and our blackroom down below. Now we could flatten and merge all this and put it all into one layer when we're done, but I want you to see this process because as we go through these videos, I'm showing you basically every approach that I take coming in to emulsion to get my chemical tints exactly the way I want. Now, this actually looks great as a platinum, but most things do look great as a platinum. And I'm gonna go ahead and not do a platinum right now because I think what I want is a cyanotype. So I'm gonna run Cyanotype Classic, and it's gonna switch our gradient map and all our bases to cyanotype. And actually, out of the box, it really looks good. I'm gonna go to the history panel here. One thing I'll do if I don't know exactly where I wanna go is I'll just click the little icon here and create a new snapshot in the history panel. And if you drag up from your history, you can see that now we have a snapshot. The snapshot doesn't save when you save your image because it would make your files huge. But what it can be very good for is you can kind of do different variants of something like in Emulsion 4 and say, well, do I want this version or do I like that version better? In this case of our cyanotype look. Now you can see in our base cyanotype, we have of course our master tint, so we can turn this up or down, and we also have our Cyan Fidelity. You remember how I was just talking about how some cyanotypes are really lo-fi, they have almost no detail in the shadows, and others are just more of a blue kind of tint. Well, you can do both here really easy, and where you're gonna mod that the most is with Cyan Fidelity. And that affects your shadows, the fidelity of your shadows. So if I turn this up, you get this very low fidelity shadows. And that can honestly be really beautiful because it really draws attention to the tones where you want them. So by default, we have a little bit of the Cyan Fidelity turned up and down I think it comes in at about 20% or so by default. If you turn it all the way off, you're essentially just using your tinting. And of course, as always, you have all your other options and all your other mods that we could add in to mix this. But for now, I'm just looking at these base options. I'm going to turn the fidelity a little bit up. And that is to say, when I turn the opacity up of this, it's lowering the Cyan Fidelity. We could also play with these layers individually inside and how each one affects the image, but we can normally just adjust these as a group of these layers. So I'm going to leave this at about 50% right here. And it's worth noting with any of these layers, you could change blending modes, you can change opacity, you could do all kinds of different things. And as you get more comfortable, and especially if you're comfortable in Photoshop or you're getting more comfortable and you just want to play around more, don't be afraid to play around with those settings, because as always, if things go wrong, you just come back and you reset to your platinum base and you can start over. Don't worry about it. All right, so here we've set our fidelity. You can see that in the cyan, we also have a tone thinner. The tone thinner affects more the pushing of the highlights. So as we push the tones up, and this can also be very, very powerful for giving us that strong, authentic look. Every element that each one of the emulsions is adding in Emulsion 4 is there for a reason, because the tone thinner oftentimes is good. I don't want to blow my highlights, but I don't want it to seem like just a tint. The beauty of emulsion is we're doing so much more than just split toning here. So if I turn my tone thinner up a little bit, and you can see this is a top tint, the cyan tone thinner, it's coming after the tint adjustment. And what it's actually doing is kind of adding contrast with an emphasis, as you see here in the tone curve, and you can manually modify it, an emphasis on highlights. And this again goes back to the fact that Cyanotype is a very old process, and a lot of the classic Cyanotype process in the darkroom does kind of give you a very low fidelity look that has strong contrasts, deep low fidelity shadows, and pushed highlights. How far you want to take that is entirely up to you. Now, there's another option, and I'm going to go to my history panel again and take a snapshot. And I'm going to go here, and you can see we have the Wet Plate Grit Remix. Now, if I click the Wet Plate Grit Remix, it's going to give me a different variant of the Cyanotype that's less blue, but still very, very intense. So I can adjust my main tone, my master tint here, and I can also adjust my Cyan Fidelity, and I can add more blue in using that Cyan Fidelity. You can see here, though, that this is actually adding textures. And this is coming in to the seamless textures. I screwed it up. I screwed it up. I didn't. I didn't switch the screen. Okay, I'm going to switch the screen. I'm going to go back to our snapshot and just redo this part. I'll edit it out later for you guys. Okay, so let's see here. Let's go back. All right, let's do a different variant of our Cyanotype here. This looks good, but let's see what else we can do. I'm going to go up here and just do the Cyanotype Thin Remix, which is going to give us a completely different variant of the Cyanotype. So as you can see, we have all the same layers we added before, but then it's adding in others. It's giving us a slightly different color profile to give us this look. Okay, so I have the same controls that I did before, and I can still control those in terms of how much I want in the Cyan Fidelity. I have a tone thinner, and you can see that we've actually kind of doubled up the tone thinner on this one. We do not have to use both if we don't need to, but this particular mix is going for a more thin, stripped down kind of cyan, but we can then mix it up how we want. So I can also adjust that with things like paper softness and detail down here in these layers, and I can mix these layers around to get whatever look I want. The other thing worth noting is I could say, hey, I really like this, but I want my sky to be a little more intense. There's two ways we can do that and do more local adjustments. If you look here, you can see that we can do a burn and dodge mix. And if I click this layer, it actually adds a burn and dodge middle gray layer which is a non-destructive burn and dodge layer right under the master tint, which means that anything we do to that is also going to come in on the tint. Let me show you. If I go up here to the burn tool, okay, I select a burn tool right here in the toolbar. Burn, and let's go up here and select burn midtones. You can change the range. I'm going to set my exposure at about 20% so it's not too intense. Now look what's happening. I can Alt and right click and move the mouse to change hardness and softness and diameter, or I can just do all that from up here in my brush settings. All right, just so if you don't know burn and dodge, I talk about burn and dodge in a lot of my workshops, but just so you're up to speed. Now what I can do with this here is I can bring more darkness into the sky, like this, for example. I might say, hey, this is too light. I just want it all a little bit darker up here. And this is really going back to what we did in the darkroom with burn and dodge. And it's a powerful tool that's very underused in the digital world. So I can bring a lot of fidelity and detail, but I don't have to stop there. I can go up here and switch to burn shadows, for example. And if I'm burning shadows, that's going to affect specifically the shadow tones. I can adjust the intensity of that burn and dodge. I could do a little shadow burning in the foreground, for example, here to darken down the agave even more. I could also switch to dodging, which is lightening. And I could say, hey, let's dodge the midtones and kind of bring a little bit more light here into this horizon, which is going to contrast our agave plants on that horizon even more. Now that's too much because I have my exposure set to 100. Let's turn that down to more like 20 or 30. Generally, when I burn and dodge, I will use a low exposure because it's very easy to kind of feather in. You paint, 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 and you can balance it out and get the look you want. So all of that was done on this burn and dodge layer, which is now totally non-destructive. I can adjust the opacity and do everything I want. And since it's below the master tint adjuster, the tints are adjusting dynamically, just like when we add a curves layer. Now, it's worth noting that sometimes if you want to go really hardcore on burn and dodge, it can be better to do an actual image layer, not a middle gray layer like this. So sometimes I will take the base point layer. This is here as your starting point for your conversion at the very bottom, but it can also be very useful for getting creative effects. Because if I burn and dodge on the base layer, it's still going to affect the image. Even though, yes, we have these other layers above it, all those layers are blending modes, they're semi-transparent, and so the effect we're gonna get here is a little different, but there's nothing wrong with doing burn and dodge on the base layer itself. In fact, sometimes you will get more detail and more control. So if I'm just doing a quick burn and dodge, adding the burn and dodge layer from right there in the actions panel in Emulsion 4 works amazing. But if I know I'm going to do a lot of burn and dodging, I might just go down to that base layer and just work on that layer because I can still control the opacity and the intensity of that since it is a separate layer. Okay, so here we go again. This is our thin remix. We've done a little burning and dodging, and let's snapshot it just to kind of give you an overview. We've done 3 variants of this cyanotype. Here was the base variant, here was the thin remix, and here's the thin remix after we played with it and burn and dodged and worked with it. And of course, we still have all the control. We can add other options. We can add more cooling. We can adjust our cyan fidelity. We can basically go wherever we want with this, make it as blue, as cyanotype, as rich, or as subtle. We can go subtle also, and sometimes that may be exactly what you want to do. In fact, remember, this was black and white to start with. So if I wanted to subtle this down, I could come in here and I could adjust, for example, the master tint and just make it very soft and get a very nice, rich, slightly cyan tinted black and white. But I could also leave my master layer up and I could actually go to the main group that Emulsion 4 and all of its layers are in, and I could turn off up or down all the cyan layers simultaneously and just be kind of fading those out to wherever I want. And then when I get it the way I like it, I can save it as is, or I can go up to the action at the top and merge the mix into one layer, which is going to put all my emulsion mix here into this layer. You can see my black room. I didn't merge my black room. I could merge the black room as well. Right now I just merged my cyanotype. And that's honestly the features, but it's just the beginning because you can mix it with the mods. You can adjust the layers. You can play with this to your heart's content to get the exact cyanotype that you want Or you can just say, hey, Gavin, you got it right out of the box. I'm using it. I got things to do. Either one works. Hope you guys enjoy it.